you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Are you in DC or in Albuquerque?
I'm in Albuquerque. I'm at
Okay.
my house in Albuquerque, thankfully.
Yes.
Yeah.
Green chili takeout. Can't get that in DC. Right?
It's much better when there are silver linings to every dark cloud in life.
Absolutely. As long as I can get my chili, I'm good.
Well, we are waiting to try and plug in Daniel, so we hope that he can join us via phone here. He's having internet connection problems, so we're going to give him another minute. Rebecca, do you have a sense of whether or not we're going to have good fortune on bringing him in? You're muted, Rebecca.
Apologies. Hi, Congresswoman. It's nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too.
He had just called in, and to all of those that are watching, I've got Daniel so over my shoulder because you're not able to see his beautiful face, leading one of his famous fracking reality tours. He's called in, he's calling back in, and we will unmute him when he's in.
Great. I'd like to just give him another moment so we can start with all of our guests. So give us just another moment here.
Yeah, and thanks to Rebecca. So thank you so much, Congresswoman, for being with us. And I think the fact that we're trying to get Daniel So on and we're having some difficulties just speaks volumes to the challenges that the Navajo Nation and other tribal communities are facing in this era of a pandemic. That it's so hard to engage virtually, and yet that's oftentimes the only forum that we have to weigh in.
Yes.
We're going to talk a little bit about that later, but that was on full display with the U.S. Bureau of Land Management's recent virtual public hearings on their plans for new plan for the Greater Chaco region. Yeah, very, very frustrating and disappointing situation.
It's shameful, I think, on their part. Anything to silence people, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, we'll hopefully get into that. How are things looking, Rebecca?
So I've got Daniel So here on speakerphone. He can hear you. Daniel, say hello. Let's check that sound.
Hello?
Great.
Can you hear me now?
That's good.
We can hear you, Dan.
Great. Why don't we get started? Thank you. So welcome. Thank you all for joining on today's call. My name is John Horning. I'm the Executive Director of WildEarth Guardians. We have Guardians supporters from all over the country taking part in this call. Now more than ever, we're delighted to connect with the Guardians community as we're all dealing with the uncertainty of this global pandemic. And of course, adjusting to the social isolation from the varying degrees of lockdown that's happening in each of our states and communities. We're all affected by this in different ways, and I truly believe that we're all in this together. This is a difficult time for our country and the world. Just want to acknowledge that there are 33 million Americans out of work, and I think we all feel a sense of tremendous vulnerability in these times. I hope that you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. And with that, I want to tell you that this is the latest edition of what we call WildEarth webinars, where we bring together local, regional, and national issue experts, people from impacted communities, elected officials, and WildEarth Guardian staff to talk about a critical issue at a critical time. Our purpose is to inform, inspire, and activate Guardians like you to help us confront powerful extractive industries, demand greater leadership from our elected officials, to solve the nature and climate crises and create the kind of world that we all want. With me today are Congresswoman Deb Haaland from her home in Albuquerque. Welcome. Congresswoman Haaland is of Laguna Pueblo and representative of the 1st Congressional District in New Mexico. We also have Navajo Nation Delegate Daniel So, WildEarth Guardians Climate and Energy Program Director Jeremy Nichols, who's at his home in Golden, Colorado, and Senior Climate Campaigner Rebecca Sobel, who's at her home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Welcome to each of you. Today we'll be talking about the Greater Chaco landscape of the Four Corners, which is in the crosshairs of the Trump administration's energy dominance agenda. Chaco Canyon is arguably the most significant cultural site on public lands in the United States. Its archaeological and cultural values are so significant that it's been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And for the ancestral Puebloan people, the landscape remains sacred. Unfortunately, the more recent chapters in the history of the region are darker. Four Corners has been called a national energy sacrifice zone, and it bears ample scars of eras of coal, uranium, and oil and gas extraction. The fracking boom is the latest energy extraction activity to besiege the communities, culture, and climate of the region. The Trump administration's Bureau of Land Management is currently considering a plan that would allow another 3,000 wells to be fracked, not only on the doorstep of Chaco Culture National Historic Park, but also in the backyards of Eastern Navajo communities and residents. The BLM will be taking comment for just another 8 days on a land use plan that, if approved, would rubber stamp continued extraction. The BLM's public comment period on this industry endorsed plan is taking place at a time when Navajo communities are experiencing intense trauma of the COVID-19 global health pandemic, with some of the highest rates of infection in the country. Excuse me, I hope that if you haven't already, you will take action for the Greater Chaco region once this webinar ends later today. Our voices absolutely need to be heard. So with that introduction, I wanted to start by asking each of our guests, starting with you, Congresswoman, and then you, Daniel, to describe your role in the campaign to protect Greater Chaco and its communities, and also why this place matters to you. And once the Congresswoman goes and Daniel goes, I'd like to hear from you, Jeremy, and Rebecca as well.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone from WildEarth Guardians for caring so deeply about Chaco Canyon and all the work that you have done to bring attention to it. As the representative of New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, I serve as vice chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, and I also chair the subcommittee on national parks, forests, and public lands. So that gives me, some leeway to move this issue forward in Congress. I was an original co-sponsor of the Chaco Cultural Heritage Protection Act, now in the 116th Congress. I chaired the subcommittee hearing on the bill, shepherded the bill through committee markup where it passed by a bipartisan vote, and I managed the bill on the floor of the House of Representatives where it also passed by a bipartisan vote. I helped bring several of my colleagues on the Natural Resources Committee, Chairman Raul Grijalva and Subcommittee Chairman Alan Lowenthal, to New Mexico for a field hearing. We visited Chaco Canyon and the surrounding area, also with Assistant Speaker Ben Ray Lujan. We were also joined by Council Delegate So and folks from WildEarth Guardians, and we witnessed firsthand using cutting edge infrared technology, the methane pollution coming off oil and gas operations in the area. Chaco is important to me because it's my ancestral homeland and because the toxic cloud that hangs over the region is hurting the people who live there. And I have to say that it's my uneducated belief. I'm not a medical person, but I have to believe that when you have toxic air pollution that you live with every single day, that a respiratory illness is something that would affect you in a harsher way than it would people who don't have that. I want our kids to grow up in a pollution-free environment, and that's definitely one of the reasons why I'm fighting for this. And thank you for the question.
Great. Thank you for your leadership on all kinds of public lands issues and especially on the Greater Chaco issue. Daniel, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Try to talk as loud as possible, Daniel.
What should I say to the WildEarth Guardians? On guard, on guard.
Okay.
Basically, my Navajos identify to each other by clan. My clan is Tenjakina, the Honeycomb Cliff Dweller clan. So my matrilineal lineage goes to all of the Greater Chaco landscape. We started our effort to protect the Greater Chaco area in late 2009. And by 2010, it was occurring in earnest at the 3 chapters of the district that I represent at Councilor Ohoncino Ontoria. And that my district basically takes in 5 other chapters. Also, so in that regard, the main aspect was, hey, we don't have very much political capital influence. We have even fewer aspects of knowledge regarding what we're facing. And so we asked the elders of the 3 chapters, can we go outside and seek help from other folks? And so that's where they gave us permission. And so it's been going for since 2010. We formed the Chaco the Counselor Citizens Committee, and with Teresa Seamster, we did the initial health impact assessment. Then as we people learned about what we were up to, then we had Navajo-based environmentalists come, and basically one of the members basically says, well, let's look at this through Navajo lens. And so that's where we initiated the Wajanganata study that would take in the cultural foundational aspects and see how that was being impacted. So in that respect, then mixing traditional ecological knowledge as well as scientific methodology we basically started doing air quality monitoring tests, and then also at about the same time, then with the help of individual Robert Tolley, I took Lena Moffett and her mom on the Fracking is Fracking reality tour, the initial one. And since then, we've gone on many, and probably influenced lots of people. And I think we've helped also to bring in the technology of the FLIR cameras to where Representative Deb Haaland made reference to it. So right now in our citizen science committee, we've shown the high volumes of hydrogen sulfide and the various forms of propane, propanol, and all the other different aspects of that, as well as the uranium showing up in the water, as well as we've gained knowledge that radium is also another toxic extraction that is occurring. And for us, that health impact is the greatest impact on Navajo society that currently lives out there. And part of the work now we've done is I've gotten the council to pass a resolution, and that has been sent to Secretary Bernhardt, and it is requesting the Bureau of Land Management and Bureau of Indian Affairs to extend the deadlines for whole nation input into the Farmington Gallup Natural Resources Management Plan Amendment, and that is CMA 47-20. So we are, and we will be, Speaker Damon and I will be signing on that letter shortly and sending it to Secretary Bernhardt. So in every level, we've addressed this resource management plan, and we continue to say delay it. And for me not to be able to be on the webinar, but to be calling in on a cell phone, that also basically exacerbates the need that there is the great need to be doing the on the ground hearings regarding this resource management plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
It's great to have you, Daniel. I just want to say I've heard from many people who've been on your fracking tours, and they've taken great inspiration from your tenacity and deep commitment to this work. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for your leadership. Jeremy, Rebecca, quick introduction to yourselves and your connection to the Chaco work.
So my name is Jeremy Nichols. I'm the Climate and Energy Program Director for WildEarth Guardians and have been for the last 12 years. And I'm so honored to be here today. Thank you so much, U.S. Representative Deb Haaland is joining us from Albuquerque, and Navajo Nation Council Delegate Daniel. So it's so good to hear from you, Daniel. It'd be great to see you, but it's great we can hear from you at least. And so Guardians has been very proud and honored to work with Representative Deb Haaland and other members of the New Mexico Congressional Delegation, Navajo allies, Pueblo allies, and lots of partner groups, environmental groups, energy groups, social justice groups to try to secure protections for the Greater Chaco region for many years now. And as Daniel mentioned, the region has been under siege by a surge of fracking. Hydraulic fracturing technology developed and allowed the industry to tap formations in the region that were previously not economic to tap, and that has led them to encroach closer and closer to Chaco Canyon, which of course is the heart of the Greater Chaco region of Northwest New Mexico. We have engaged primarily in the federal courts and also in organizing and together with our grassroots allies to try to push back against the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, which is primarily responsible for approving most of the fracking in the region. We've had some success in the federal courts, but the challenge remains. And as Representative Haaland and Daniel So mentioned, the Bureau of Land Management is right back at it with a new plan to open the door for thousands of new oil and gas wells in the Greater Chaco region in this culturally significant landscape. And of course, more fracking means more air pollution, means more water contamination, means more risk to public health, and at a time when public health is so strained. And the Bureau of Land Management did just hold what they call virtual public meetings over Zoom. Unfortunately, many of the most impacted people, tribal communities in the region and who identify with the region, were not able to participate, in large part because of the COVID-19 health crisis, but also because a lack of adequate internet access. And so this is as much of an environmental issue as it is a justice issue. And we're seeing that very clearly right now as we're engaging to try to defend this culturally important landscape and to chart a new path for more prosperous economies and a healthier environment. I'll hand it off to Rebecca.
Well, I don't have much to add. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Rebecca Sobel. I'm the Senior Climate and Energy Campaigner for WildEarth Guardians. I don't think I've been at Guardians quite 12 years, but it's been a long time also. I have the privilege of working with the folks on this call and also with the Greater Chaco Coalition. So I have the honor to get to call Council Delegate So a friend. And Daniel, you can't see it, but on my Zoom desktop, I have a picture of you leading a fracking reality tour with a classic Daniel So smile on your face that just brings a big smile to my face. So I have the, I think, nickname Rebecca from Daniel, but my job tends to be to work in concert with tribal communities that are impacted, both Navajo and Pueblo, environmental allies, and the general public, to call for justice in the region. And I don't know if I'd call it the privilege, but I was at all of these BLM virtual meetings and even the BLM meetings beforehand, and happy to represent Guardians and all those that are not afraid to speak out and be in service to the huge movement that's demanding reform and restraint on fracking this not only culturally sacred landscape, but home to people, and ecologically, environmentally significant landscape.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca, Jeremy, Daniel, Representative Haaland. I wanted to come back to you, Representative Haaland, and say that I watched you on C-SPAN this past October when you introduced your remarks about the Chaco bill. I'll just say I was deeply moved. It was inspiring to watch you. And I'm curious to hear some reflections on the legislation. You know, what's your sense of its prospects for passage through Congress, and whether or not the president would sign it, and any other reflections on the bill as it relates to the broader region and the needs of the region in these times.
Thank you, John. Thank you. So Chaco Canyon and the Greater Chaco region have been home to my people for centuries. As a 35th generation New Mexican and a descendant of the indigenous inhabitants of what is now the Southwest United States, I can say that there are few places more exceptional than the Chaco region. Over hundreds of years, my ancestors engineered and constructed those massive multi-story structures at Chaco that became the ceremonial, administrative, and economic center of the region. The sites and the objects they contain tell the history of my people and connect us to our past. And in fact, when we were there, if you recall, during our the field hearing we had, we were joined by Governor Vayo from Acoma Pueblo. He went on that field trip with us. And during the time we were walking around Chaco, we were just talking about, imagine how it was hundreds of years ago when this place was, full of life, when people were actually living and working here. It's not difficult to imagine that, because in some ways we're still living in that infrastructure in our own Pueblo villages across New Mexico. So it's not really that far of a jump from Chaco to now. We still go back to Chaco Canyon and pray and perform ceremony and do the things that our ancestors have instructed us to do over the centuries. And I'm so honored that we're working on this together. The Navajo Nation Council Delegate has been unwavering in his support. The Navajo Nation, it's also a sacred site for the people there. So we all need to work together. The Pueblos and the Navajo Nation still have intimate connections with that region. And we all recognize that the area as a spiritual place deserves to be honored and respected. That can never go away. And that's what I'll continue to fight for.
Thank you for your leadership again. Do you have a sense for prospects for passage? I know the House has passed it, but any sense from your colleagues, our Senate representatives, about whether or not the bill has chances of passing in the Senate?
Sure. Well, as you know, there are challenges in the Senate, starting with the Senate Majority Leader. However, I'd like to just, mention that Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska chairs the committee with jurisdiction over the bill, and she's close with the oil and gas industry for obvious reasons. Also, the New Mexico oil and gas interests have been organizing some of the Navajo allottees to lobby her against the bill, or to make changes such as reducing the size of the buffer zone, which I absolutely do not support. We passed 10 miles. That's what I support. That's what we need. The congressional docket is pretty packed, and there's limited time to consider bills on the Senate floor even before the pandemic. So we'd been hoping that this could be included in some year-end package of lands bills, and there are a number of those. With the schedule being totally upended, I don't know what might happen or what the timing might be. In the meantime, we enacted a legislative moratorium on the fiscal year 20 appropriations that last through the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. I've requested that the moratorium be extended in the FY21 Interior Appropriations Bill, which is particularly important given what the Trump administration is trying to do. I just want to think back to, I got sworn in during a government shutdown. Everything was shut down, but the president still managed to get these right? The permitting office was open for business. Yeah. Everything else was shut down. People couldn't get health care. Indian tribes couldn't get, their Meals on Wheels and urban Indian health care. But the president managed to get these extractive permits through. So it is, this is not unlike them. There's one thing, in my opinion, I don't know if I can say this, but I'll say it. This is an election year, and you can bet that I'm going to be fighting to make sure that we have an administration who cares about our environment.
Well, I can say this because it's fact. What Trump did within the first week of this pandemic was to talk about how to bail out the oil and gas industry. So the bias, the outrageous behavior has been consistent from this administration from, as you said, the day you were sworn in to probably in the last 5 or 10 minutes. I'm sure there's been another tweet from this president that's been a disgrace to those of us who care about addressing the climate crisis and dealing with the disgrace of fossil fuel extraction on public lands. I actually think it'd be good to hear from both you, Representative Haaland, and others about the BLM's process. Jeremy touched on this earlier, but it's a process that has the process around this resource management plan. Perhaps you, Jeremy, could just describe what specifically is at stake in terms of the BLM's plan, and then others could comment on the hearings and how they've reinforced the bias of this administration through their exclusionary tactics.
Yeah. And so folks know, we had high hopes for the Bureau of Land Management's proposed plan. Way back when they first started this process in, I think it was 2013, they indicated that they recognized that this surge in fracking presented new risks and uncertainty and new threats to public health and the environment, and that they wanted to develop a plan that would address those issues and provide protection for the landscape and for people. And they held a series of public outreach meetings in chapter houses and in communities throughout the region, and at the time showed this immense willingness to want to listen to people and to respond to their concerns. And they actually issued a report highlighting that the new plan needed to protect communities, it needed to protect health, it needed to protect the climate and clean air and water. And they made these promises to us that they were going to follow through with developing such a plan. And the plan that landed this year, it actually came out at the end of February, is nothing but a broken promise, a list of broken promises, and sadly, another set of broken promises facing this region. It doesn't do anything to increase protections for people, at least as proposed. It considers a variety of alternatives, and while some of the alternatives are a step forward in some respects, I think overall, conceptually, it takes a big step backwards in terms of opening the door for more of the same destructive industrial development that we've been fighting against for so long. And it's hugely unfortunate. We thought that the Bureau of Land Management recognized that it had a duty to be a good steward of the resources in the landscape, to put people first. But unfortunately, under this administration, people are not coming first. Unfortunately, it's the polluters. So we have our work cut out for us, and we have been pushing back together with so many diverse allies. And the Bureau of Land Management ostensibly offered us an opportunity for public involvement through virtual Zoom meetings, which were held over the last week. And Rebecca and I and many others participated in these virtual public meetings, and I got to say they were anything but a public meeting. It was the BLM talking to us, not listening to us. Nobody was on video. It was about as far away as you could get from a public meeting as possible, and it's unfortunate, and I think speaks volumes to the fact that one, so many of the most impacted people in the region and people who are concerned about the Greater Chaco plan simply don't have access to adequate internet to be able to engage in a virtual Zoom meeting. It's kind of a curse and a blessing for us in this time where it's great that we have so much access, but it also exposes the fact that many people do not have adequate access to broadband. But also, it speaks to the fact that the people felt disempowered. It wasn't a forum for people to engage and to be heard. It was a forum for people to, ostensibly be given an opportunity to provide comment to the Bureau of Land Management. And I actually personally spoke out and I asked the BLM, why won't you show your faces? Because they wouldn't show their faces. Why won't you interact with us? Why won't you engage? And it was silence, dead silence. And I think, again, that speaks volumes to the fact that the Bureau of Land Management is not interested in being responsive to the public anymore. Where they once were, I think it's very clear under this administration that this is about getting the oil and gas industry in the driver's seat and giving them as much as they want. Rebecca might be able, I'm sure you can add more to that.
I wouldn't, you pretty much summed it up, Jeremy. What I think it's important that the public knows is, we're dealing with the Four Corners area, the northwestern region of New Mexico, which is not, the borders of the Greater Chaco landscape don't stop at the state lines of New Mexico either. And I think what's important to know is that the Navajo Nation, the Four Corners region, has been an energy sacrifice zone officially by the federal government since the Nixon administration. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, it's been uranium, it's been coal, it's been traditional oil and gas, and now it's this industrialized fracking. It's a new beast. It goes 10 times deeper into the ground and out miles in every direction, using exorbitant more amounts of water and producing a lot more air pollution, and essentially industrializing a landscape that was remote and serene and the home of communities that have been living quietly on it for generations. And what's been important about this plan that the public should know is that the Bureau of Land Management has never analyzed the impacts of this industrialized fracking on this landscape. And that the reason that this plan, this amendment, is moving forward is because the Bureau of Land Management acknowledged that they never analyzed the impacts of this industrialized drilling. And what's important is, I mean, I can say that I've been lucky enough to stand alongside folks on the ground for years now, and there has been a steady drumbeat, a resounding call by hundreds of thousands of citizens, not just New Mexicans, but folks across the country and across the world, from dozens of Navajo chapters, from multiple dozens of pueblos, including the All Pueblo Council of Governors, the National Congress of American Indians, the entire New Mexico congressional delegation. Everybody has called for restraint, for meaningful tribal consultation, understanding that consultation is not just checking a box, but is about free, prior, and informed consent. And there's a whole conversation that feels like theater and lip service when the BLM says they're interested in feedback and input, but their actions don't demonstrate. So those virtual meetings, and we will post some links, we have all of the videos and you all can watch it, but I can tell you that there were 5 meetings and there wasn't a single person in any of those 5 meetings that I'd say collectively didn't even have 100 people give comment. There wasn't a single person that commended that process. And the Bureau of Land Management knows that it's not doing its job well enough. And that's why it joined with the Bureau of Indian Affairs for the first time, as far as we know, in this kind of resource management planning process. I think we would hope that that would mean there'd be more respect to the tribes that all hold interests, both historical and present and longstanding in this region. And there's a question of legality, but there's also a question of morality. And I think, where these movement and where New Mexicans are asking is why are we allowing for the desecration of this landscape at the explicit call for restraint from every interested stakeholder, when the price per barrel of oil and gas is revenue negative right now, and when New Mexico is facing $1 billion deficit because of the crash of oil, and communities are asking, where is the transition? Why can't we start moving? And I will say, because Congresswoman Haaland talked about the Navajo allotment landowners that are getting royalty payments from as a result of this oil and gas drilling. And I want to put into context too, that there are some that in this checkerboarded area, there are Navajo allotment landowners that own mineral rights and get monthly, often, royalty payments as a result of drilling on their allotments. This money isn't enough, unfortunately, to change anyone's life or a generation's life. But when you're in a community where 40% or a third lack access to electricity, to running water, to broadband internet, there are very few options for sustainable economic development and for families to be able to make the money that they need. And that's why this issue is also a call for environmental justice and transition and support for the communities that are most impacted to be able to make money without having to destroy their land and water. And Daniel, I don't know if I want to let you add anything if you've got it.
Thank you to all on the call. Basically, our attention is to the health crisis that we're facing. I mean, as of 5 o'clock last evening, 144 had passed. And our folks that have tested positive is now well over 4,000 individuals. And so our attention is over in the area of healthcare. Our attention is in the area of water delivery, in the area of food delivery. And then so that is where our focus is. And at the leadership, the Navajo Nation Council is basically looking at how to improve that water infrastructure, the power line grid onto the areas that sorely need it. You know, the resource management plan should be a new plan, not just an amendment to the 2003 plan. The 2003 plan, it's a slippery slope in favor of the oil and gas industry.
You know, I couldn't agree more with you.
The use aspect of the public lands, it's turned into a singular use, and in those aspects, it's unbelievable how the oil and gas industry can influence.
I couldn't agree with you more, Daniel. This is just
Hello?
Well, sorry, I'm interrupting. Finish.
You still there, Daniel?
Okay, yeah, I'm still here. I guess the main thing is we need a new plan and not these alternatives with true input from the allotment owners as well as the folks that are living out there, the ones that are impacted. I have one older man that took care of his mom and his aunt. His mom passed away. Before, he was really right beside us. I'm with you. I'm with you. And a couple of days after his mom passed away, I went to visit him. And his whole spirit had changed. And he's wiping the dust off of his oilcloth covered table. And he says, I guess this is what I have to endure the rest of my life, because these trucks, there is no, these trucks are going through here day and night. And so those are the aspects that the folks are facing. And part of the whole system, the right-of-ways for water lines and power lines, through this matrix of land holdings, the BLM basically limits the infrastructure development out in the area, the right-of-ways for roads, power lines, and for water lines. And so that's the reason, that area has been classified as a third world country. And the poverty level is just, some of the descriptions that people on the fracking tours, their impressions, why do the people have to have their rooms covered, their windows covered with the blue tarps that they buy at Kmart? And basically, it's like, that's because the dust pervades. And they think that putting that up will keep the noxious fumes and gases out of their living quarters. So those are some of the real down.
Yeah, Daniel, I want to echo.
That's what they're dealing with, and that's what the Bureau of Land Management, their plan doesn't get acknowledged. It doesn't address those aspects.
I want to echo your point, Daniel, about not only the BLM being totally tone deaf in light of the health pandemic that Navajo communities are facing, but also that we need a whole new paradigm not only going back to sort of prior to the 2003 plan, but we need an Interior Department that adopts a radically different view of its role and responsibilities to the land, to the communities, and to our climate. And I would love to have an Interior Secretary in a new administration that is helping Navajo communities have energy that is democratized, decentralized, and decarbonized. And I think we can do that. And it would be great to have a citizens plan that really articulates those views. I wanted to just briefly ask you, Representative Haaland, you mentioned the 10-mile radius and the moratorium. What's your perception of Interior Secretary Bernhardt's commitment to that moratorium? Because our sense is that they're constantly, in small ways and large, undermining the commitment that's been made by allowing development within that 10-mile area. And then I want to get to litigation, and then I want to remind all of our listeners that we're going to have an opportunity for questions of each of the panelists here in about another 5 minutes.
So, sorry, I have somebody's mowing in the backyard, so they're trimming all the things, so it's a little loud. I apologize for that. Look, it's a travesty. I mean, I'm grateful for the, I want to be grateful for the little tidbits that we get, right? I mean, the 1-year moratorium, we knew it wasn't long enough when it happened, right? But at least it gave us time to work on this issue. It certainly gave us time to pass the bill, but we see where that's gotten us, right? What I think is a complete travesty is that they're continuing with this process. The whole New Mexico congressional delegation, and we wrote a letter right after this pandemic started, asking that the timeline to the comment period be extended. They don't listen to us. I wrote an opinion piece about this that was published in the Albuquerque Journal recently, about how the process that they're dealing with right now is essentially silencing Native Americans. It's silencing the peoples whose lives are affected by this very thing. And it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful that the people that Daniel was talking about don't have a voice in this whole process. So we'll keep fighting for this. But look, I mentioned this earlier on. The folks who are being affected more by this pandemic are the ones who are breathing polluted air every single day. And not only that, I want to just say, we are working on getting an emergency broadband bill in. I want everybody to be able to have internet service. That is proving to be a human right in 2020, quite frankly, that during this pandemic, people have not been able to connect and communicate the way they need to. And that is absolutely imperative. We're working very hard on that. The kids who don't have broadband, who haven't been able to keep up with their schoolwork and be in touch with their schools and teachers, I mean, they're the ones also, when we did our field trip, that was the most informative thing that I had done with respect to this issue. We found out that kids were being held up by those same trucks that Daniel's talking about for an hour, sitting on the bus. When it takes them an hour and a half already to get to and from school, they're having to sit on their bus and wait for the trucks to get out of the way so they can move, so the school buses can get to school. This situation is untenable for the future of the people in that area. All of our kids, every single one of our children deserve a quality public education. They are being held up from doing that because of this situation. And so there are so many things that this affects. Yes, it affects our air. Yes, it affects our sacred sites. Yes, it's going to ruin one of the most culturally significant places on earth. the list goes on. So it is an environmental injustice. We'll keep fighting it, and yes, we need people. We need an administration who cares as much about our environment as it does about everything else.
Yeah, with those words, I want to remind all the participants, listeners, that if you've already sent a letter to the BLM on this Greater Chaco RMP, thank you. If you have not, I really urge you to take action. We need to flood the administration's inbox, and I ask you to engage in peer-to-peer sharing so that we can address the fundamental injustices and inequities that are central to what the Trump administration is trying to do by sacrificing these communities' interests, the climate, and the sacred values, all for the sake of giving away our public lands to the oil and gas industry. One thing before we go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I just want to give, just to reiterate, a huge thanks and shout out to Congresswoman Haaland and the New Mexico congressional delegation. They have been with us on the front lines, asking for more time, asking for the Bureau of Land Management to bring a sense of justice and morality to this process. And so just want to reiterate the thanks. And just so folks know, the New Mexico congressional delegation has been amazingly supportive of efforts to protect Greater Chaco and the people who are impacted.
Yeah, and you told me that, didn't you tell me that the governor added her name to the list of New Mexico?
Yeah. New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham sent her letter yesterday calling for an extension of the public comment period and echoing a lot of the sentiments that we've heard today from Congresswoman Haaland and New Mexico's congressional delegation. So super great to be backed by our elected officials.
It is great when we're all aligned. I actually think just in the next few minutes, Jeremy, it'd be great to hear just briefly, especially given what the Trump administration is doing, given that legislation is out there, we still have the backstop of federal litigation. Our team's efforts, your team's efforts have been heroic in holding the line. And as I was saying to Jeremy, I think that the definition of persistence is our work on Greater Chaco in our legal advocacy. Could you just in a minute or two touch on that? And then I want to encourage again all of our listeners to be thinking about questions for Representative Haaland, Daniel So, and or Jeremy and Rebecca. But in a minute or two, Jeremy, just touch on our legal advocacy.
Yeah, and just so folks know, you're free to reach out to us anytime with questions and concerns. So I know we may not be able to get to all questions and be responsive fully today, but please, we are available, and I'm sure Congresswoman Haaland would welcome inquiries and feedback around this issue. But yeah, WildEarth Guardians, together with allies, Dene Citizens Against Ruining Our Environment, San Juan Citizens Alliance, NRDC and the Sierra Club and the Western Environmental Law Center, we have been in the courtroom pushing back against the Bureau of Land Management's rubber stamping of more fracking in the region. We actually secured a major federal appeals court ruling last year that held that the Bureau of Land Management had in fact illegally approved hundreds of new fracking wells in the region. Unfortunately, the Bureau of Land Management's response to that ruling has been utter flouting. They have continued to approve more fracking, and even the fracking that was deemed illegal, they've allowed it to continue on the landscape. So we did renew our legal efforts last year, and just this month filed a new lawsuit challenging hundreds of new oil and gas wells that have been improved over the last few years, both after our big win last year and also wells approved prior to that win. So we're doing everything we can to get the courts involved and to enforce facts, science, and most importantly, the law. And we have succeeded. It's been a dogged fight for us. And as our partners at the Western Environmental Law Center and other allies can attest, it hasn't been without our losses. In fact, our appeals court win came after losing in court 4 times. But it speaks to the need to persist here, to continue to be on the front lines pushing for what the Greater Chaco region needs. It seems dire right now, and the challenges seem insurmountable, especially in light of the COVID-19 health crisis, but we can overcome this. And I think together, we're in best position to overcome this and to chart a new future for the Greater Chaco region.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just looking at the participants' questions, I'm going to paraphrase this, but I'm curious to hear from you, Representative Haaland. What's your sense of the viability, not so much the viability, but the Green New Deal and the way in which a Green New Deal can help address the crisis in places like Chaco and help bring an end to fossil fuel extraction on our public lands and help Western communities adapt to the changing realities of our time?
Well, I mean, absolutely. We're working on the Green New Deal right now. It is, I mean, it's just that. It's putting our Earth first. You know, I'm always so amazed that people don't make the connection between the fact that our Earth gives us everything. Everything. The chair I'm sitting on, the computer I'm looking at right now. We have everything that we have today. We've gotten from our Earth. It behooves me that people don't realize the same thing that is giving us what we have, we're not working to protect. It doesn't make any sense to me. You know, the Green New Deal, it's just that. It's to move our country and our world forward with new green infrastructure, changing over the way we do business, the way we get our energy, the way we, you know, move our country forward. I talk with a lot of people just in conversation because I'm an elected representative. I just talk with a lot of constituents. This one man I remember, he said, we have the most powerful nuclear energy resource and it's in the sky. Why aren't we using it, right? Why aren't we just using all the solar energy that we possibly can? It doesn't make sense to me. When I see that big, square of gas and oil infrastructure in the middle of the desert, I imagine solar panels being there instead. The Green New Deal is everything. It's helping us to move over to a green energy economy, to protect our Earth, to lower carbon emissions, all of the legislation that we have pushed forward, the 30 by 30, all the zero emissions on public lands. All of these bills that we're pushing forward, they all go in that direction. So it's a no-brainer to me. And so, yes, we'll just keep pushing on that. There's a lot of us in Congress. 2018 ushered in a wave of environmentalists from all over our country. I serve with some amazing people on the Natural Resources Committee, and we want to move these issues forward, and so that's what we'll continue to work on.
Thank you. That's inspiring. It's great to have a Congresswoman representative here in New Mexico that's so accessible, so real, so authentic. And it's just, Rebecca shared a story about running into you at a hearing a couple of years ago, and she was just like, it's just so refreshing to have someone that just inspires us and we feel so aligned with. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I wasn't always a congresswoman. I was an organizer and an activist, just like everybody else. So, you know, something I found out is that, you know, hard work will get you anywhere. I'm not exceptional in the sense of, like, we're all fighting for the same things, right? Like, we're all on the front lines trying to do what we can do. I am grateful to have won my election because now all of your voices, all of, you know, the voices that I have been hearing for a long time, those can now be heard in Congress. And so we need to, you know, always keep in touch with our grassroots, the people on the ground, you know, because those are the folks who are closest to these issues. So just know that I'm always going to be here and always going to be accessible, because I rely on your voices to make sure that I am putting the right things out there.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It just restores our faith and it buoys our spirit. So I appreciate that. We're essentially at time. So I just want to close with one more thought here, which is these are critical times for our nation. They're critical times for our climate, just as they are for indigenous communities in the Four Corners, and as it is for Chaco Canyon and for all our parks and public lands. And I want to urge all of you to speak up for Chaco by signing a letter to the BLM. I also, as I've said, encourage you to engage your friends and allies, ask them to speak up for Chaco. There is a lot that's maybe beyond our reach during a time of a global pandemic, but we can do this. We can stand up for Chaco. So I really urge you all to engage with us. And I want to thank you again, Representative Haaland, for joining us and for your inspiring words. Daniel So, Delegate for the Navajo Nation, thank you. So glad you were able to join us via phone. And thank you as well, Jeremy Nichols and Rebecca Sobel, for your tenacity and energy on this critical issue. And thank you all to our members and activists who joined us. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much. And just real quick, I want to give a quick plug. Mark your calendars, May 27th, starting at 3 p.m. The Frackoff Greater Chaco Coalition is going to be holding a people's hearing to defend Greater Chaco. So we'll post the link here in the chat, and you can learn more about that. And please mark your calendar and try to attend if you can. And we're trying to empower people and give people a voice who haven't been given a voice by the Bureau of Land Management.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.